was my experience when I was a full-time nurse and in NP school? So in this video, we're going to talk all about that. So definitely keep watching. My name is Christine and welcome to new videos. Your first time here and you want to become a CRNA or grow your CRNA career. Start now by subscribing and hitting the bell so you don't miss anything. Thank you so much for being here today watching this video. I definitely want to give you some advice as well as some wisdom, as well as, what my experiences have been when I was in NP school. So when I was a full-time registered nurse in the ICU, I always knew that I wanted to go back to school, get more, education under my belt. I've always dreamed of becoming an advanced practice nurse. So initially when I was an ICU nurse, after about 6 months to a year, I said to myself, all right, it's time for me to apply to NP school, start getting classes under my belt, and of course, slowly become an NP and become an advanced practice nurse. So the nice thing about the institution I was working at, it was in a teaching institution. I worked at NYU Langone Medical Center in New York City. The nice thing about, at the time when I was in school, after 6 months of being an ICU nurse, you can go ahead and apply to NP school at NYU College of Nursing for their master's program in NP. At the time, the program was a master's program. A lot of programs are transitioning into doctoral degrees. So when I was going back to school for advanced practice nursing, I went to NYU, and it was nice because I was able to work full-time in the ICU and also take classes part-time in NP school. So yes, it was a little bit of a longer program because I worked part-time, went to school part-time, but it was nice to, of course, work full-time, not have to worry about, financial instability or anything in regards to that. As well as the nice thing about working at this specific institution, you basically, if you went to NYU, basically tuition was free. So you didn't pay for any tuition. However, you do have to pay taxes. So at the time, I think it was over a certain amount of money, you have to pay taxes. So of course, and also some type of different fees and books and those type of things. But overall, for me, going back to NP school, working full-time and also having, a decrease in the amount of money that would cost to go to, of course, to NYU was amazing, that I didn't have to pay as much than the average student because of the relationship that NYU and NYU, Medical Center had with each other. So it was great. So what I did usually, depending on the semester, I did 1 to 2 classes per semester, and I was able to work full time. The nice thing about my ICU, they were able to work around my schedule. So of course I would let my nurse manager know, hey, I have these specific classes on these specific days, and then she'd work around the schedule and make sure that I had those specific days off and I worked a certain specific days. So the nice thing was everything was pretty mapped out for the whole entire semester. It was a very easy transition. Many ICU nurses who wanted to become advanced practice nurses, for example, to become a nurse practitioner, it wasn't just me, it was multiple of us, and we would organize our schedules depending on, of course, the semester we're in, what classes we're taking, and it worked well. The nice thing that I had in my ICU was that we did 12-hour shifts. So I would do 3 12-hour shifts per week, of course, and then having 4 days off. And of course, depending on the pay period, I have to work an extra 12 hours to make up the hours. But overall, I worked 3 days a week. And then I went to school on 2 different days. So I worked, 3 days, and then I had 2 days of classes. And the nice thing about, advanced practice nursing, degrees, a lot of the programs, they work really well with, people who have families, people who are working full time. It's very easy for that type of transition. They work around your schedule. As well as a lot of times, depending on the program, of course, the school, what they would do is allow you to take a class, for example, be like once a week, and it'll be a 3-hour class. So for example, I did pathophysiology, and once a week, maybe on Monday, I would go in for class for 3 hours. And then Another class I would take, for example, if it was nursing research, it would be another 3 hours. So some days I would have 2 classes in one day, or I'd have one class one day, and then another day I would have another class. Also, it was nice because, doing 12-hour shifts gave you that flexibility to go to school as well. Some nurse practitioner programs work really well with students where you can work full-time and go to school full-time. So it is doable. And also for me, when I was in NP school, it worked well with my schedule. I mean, I could have went full-time, but I wanted to go part-time in school. That was just my decision. But a lot of programs nowadays are transitioning where you can go to work full-time and go to school full-time. However, a lot of times when you're towards the end of your program, for example, when you're doing full clinicals, working in a facility, or you're working, in a practice, for example, getting your hours, some of those hours can be intense and it could be like a full-time job itself. So a lot of times, like for example, when I was working at NYU Langone Medical Center in my ICU, a lot of the people who were ICU nurses and they were finishing up their degree their last year and had to do a lot of clinical hours, at our institution, they allowed the ICU nurses to work part-time and then of course go to school full-time for those specific hours. It was pretty rigorous that last year, year and a half, depending on your specific nurse practitioner degree. So that was a lot of a benefit to me that I really liked about NP school. For me, I felt like the workload was easy to handle. I felt I was able to get the contact information well. I felt it was just an easy transition for me. Now, comparing it to CRNA school is a totally different ballgame, in my opinion, just from my experience. I felt like a nurse practitioner school, for me, it wasn't very difficult. I felt like, of course, I had a very well-rounded study techniques, study habits. I really knew my hours. I didn't have children at the time. I didn't have a family. So I was single. So naturally, for me, it was not as difficult. Now, going to CRNA school, it's a little bit different. Now, like most of the programs that you go into CRNA school, for example, you're going to have to go to school full-time, and I don't think you can work. Now, there are some occasions, for example, your first semester of CRNA school, you can do, full-time classwork, and then you can work part-time or maybe per diem, maybe once in a while. Because a lot of times the first semester, you're mainly doing certain classes. You're doing research, basics of anesthesia, pathophysiology, pharmacology. Depending on your program, it might vary a little bit. Also, you gotta think about it too. A lot of programs, there are differences in either being front-loaded versus combination approach. So a lot of programs, nowadays, of course still varies depending on the school. They'll front-load you with your classes and your didactics. And then as you transition further on in your degree, then it's mainly clinical based with maybe one class per semester. So, if you are a person who loves working and feels to yourself like, I want to still work in the ICU, make some money to help me financially when you're in school, I think the first semester you can, but I'll be very careful in the amount of hours you work and be mindful that you might be taking away of your precious time to study. So, in my opinion, from my experience, I wouldn't recommend it. However, everyone's different. Everyone has different priorities. Definitely everyone has different study techniques. Also, in my opinion, my experience was different than many students. When I went to CRNA school versus my NP school, I had a newborn baby. I delivered my baby 6 days before I started school. So I had a newborn baby and going into CRNA school, which was pretty intense for me. I didn't realize the extent of how difficult it would be having a child, especially a newborn baby, and going to school. So my experience is a little bit different. And when I was in NP school, I was single. I didn't have, a family. I mean, of course I had my mom and my dad, but it wasn't the same. I didn't have children. And also I felt NP school in general was a lot better to like really get that information in. It wasn't as hard as comparison to CRNA school. I mean, it is hard, but there's a different type of information. And also my experience was a little different. I mean, working full-time and going to school part-time. So that could have been a difference if I was going to school full-time. But from my experience and talking to students who are in NP school, as well as people who I work with who are in NP school, it's very much easier that you can, go to school and go to NP school. So just take that into consideration when you're thinking about NP school versus CRNA school. Can I work? Can I not work? So there are a lot of differences, and definitely take that into consideration. So don't stop watching this video because I have a couple of tips and tricks for you towards the end of the video. And also, I want you to comment below, are you currently in nurse practitioner school? Are you in CRNA school? Are you working full-time in the ICU? Are you considering to go to nurse practitioner school or a CRNA school? I'll definitely love to hear those comments below. So let me continue a little bit more. So for me, when I was an ICU nurse, I didn't know for sure, at first I wanted to be a psych nurse practitioner, and then I worked in the ICU, and I realized, wow, I love the hospital setting. I'm gonna become an acute care nurse practitioner. So that was my plan. And so that's the type of experience I had. Now, of course, there was a lot of transition in my life where I realized that acute care nurse practitioner was not for me. That was just my personal experience. Not that it's not going to be it's not that it's a bad nurse practitioner degree. I think it's an amazing nurse practitioner degree. But for me, when I shadowed a CRNA, which I was like, wow, this is cool. This fits me personality-wise. I mean, there isn't a best personality for CRNA school, but I definitely have a video on that. So definitely click that video. But I felt like it just meshed well with me. I really love the techniques, area management, pain management. I love the variety in surgeries. I like that there's so many areas you can work in. And I just love the financial stability. So, however, in nursing in general, there's so many options. There's so many, I feel like if you don't like one area, you can always go into another area. And the same thing that goes along with, nurse practitioners. So when you're thinking about going into an advanced practice degree, there's many varieties. You can be a midwife. You can be a family nurse practitioner, a general nurse practitioner, acute care nurse practitioner, pediatric nurse practitioner. You could do clinical specialist and geriatrics, for example. There's so much variety that you can do in advanced practice nursing, as well as becoming a CRNA, which I, throughout the years, decided to become. So it wasn't like I was an ICU nurse and I knew for sure that I wanted to be a CRNA. I went to NP school. I really enjoyed it. I loved my classwork. I really enjoyed my program. But when I started seeing the clinical aspect of it, because for me, I did not shadow an acute care nurse practitioner. So I definitely believe before you decide on going into an advanced practice degree, shadow acute care nurse practitioner, be a pediatric nurse practitioner, definitely shadow a clinical nurse specialist, a CRNA. And if you are deciding you are a nurse and you say, I'm thinking about pre-med, maybe I want to become a doctor, shadow a doctor as well. Keep your options open. And also the experience you're getting as a nurse is amazing. And I feel like it's always an amazing profession to go into, as well as it opens the doors to many avenues that you may realize, like, wow, I'm a nurse now, and now I'm getting to see all the different areas, and now I'm seeing that this is what I want to do. So definitely keep your options open, and and if you do decide that you want to work in the ICU, or if you're not working in ICU, if you're a regular nurse on the floor, you can be a nurse on the floor, for example, and go to NP school. So you can work full-time, go to school part-time, or vice versa. You can work part-time and go to school full-time, or you can do hardcore and go to work full-time and go to school full-time. There's many avenues you can do. However, when you're thinking about CRNA, I do not recommend working full-time and going full-time in a CRNA program. For me, I think that it's a very difficult program, and I feel you need to take the information seriously. And of course, all the information, all your classworks, your clinical experience will make or break you. And so I hope this video is able to help you, and you have any ideas of, you know, your experiences. Maybe you are a nurse and you are in NP school or CRNA school. Tell me about that. So if you want to learn more about CRNAs, how to grow your CRNA career, definitely click one of these videos over here, and I'll see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.